These are the journalisms by way of critical aggregation, illuminated from the analytical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental or the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Engage impulse engines. Engage.
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 Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage.
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 Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Netanyahu, Ben Zion, Smotrich, Zvika Fogel, they all loud Zionist Occupier, illegal arson and rioting. This arson and rioting has been falsely labeled quote-unquote deterrence. Watch this space. Jewish settler leader says Huwara should be wiped out today. The deputy head of the West Bank Settlement Council, Davidi Ben Zion, called on Sunday night for illegal Jewish settlers to wipe out the village of Huwara, the Middle East Monitor reported. Enough with talk about binding and strengthening the settlement. The deterrence needs to happen immediately. There's no room for mercy, Ben Zion tweeted as illegal settlers attacked neighborhoods of the occupied West Bank city of Nablus. Although he deleted the tweet, which was reported by most of the Israeli and Palestinian media, a screenshot that shows that Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich had liked it. A leading figure in the settlement movement spoke to Israel's Khan public broadcaster on Monday morning, saying that it was a shame that the Israeli army removed settlers from Huwara. Why should we stop? We're protecting the lives of Jews. It's a shame that the army even arrived here, Daniela Weiss told Khan. She added that the settlers have lots of guns, so there's no need for military presence. Anyone who thinks that we have to use the army to deal with these attackers, the Palestinians living in Huwara, is mistaken, she says. And from MiddleEastEye.net, Huwara riots, Israel's leaders stoke flames by lauding settler attacks. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich among the senior politicians seen supporting the unprecedented attacks on Palestinian towns in the West Bank. Hours before Israeli settlers set the occupied West Bank town of Huwara ablaze on Sunday, several Israeli politicians called for the Palestinian village to be wiped out. In a since-deleted tweet, David Ben Zion, the deputy head of the Samaria Council that governs illegal settlements in the northern West Bank, called for Israeli politicians to show no mercy and that the village of Huwara should be erased today. The tweet was liked by the country's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, and followed the fatal shooting of 2 Israeli settlers carried out by suspected Palestinian gunmen on Sunday in the town. Ben Zion, who represents more than a dozen Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, including where the attack occurred, later said that he had written the comments in the heat of the moment. Smotrich's liking of the tweet by Ben Zion also drew condemnation and was viewed by some as the state sanctioning of mob violence. Our Minister of Finance, Minister of the Defensive Ministry, and a member of the Security Cabinet supports erasing an entire village when the only sin of its inhabitants is that they are Palestinian, Shir Nasatsky, a social media entrepreneur, said on Twitter. On Sunday, Smotrich escalated rhetoric himself, demanding that the Israeli army hit Palestinian cities with tanks and helicopters mercilessly in a way that would convey that the owner of the house has gone mad. With buildings in Hawara still smoldering and the Palestinian gunmen still on the run, Smotrich took to Twitter on Sunday evening to promote a thread that recommended the collective punishment of the terrorists' families and environment as an effective and necessary tool in an asymmetric warfare. Collective punishment of occupied populations is illegal under international law. At least one Palestinian was killed and nearly 400 wounded in the attacks on Hawara and other West Bank towns and villages, Palestinian health officials said. Settlers completely burnt down at least 35 homes and 40 others were partially damaged, and many of the buildings were set on fire while the Palestinian inhabitants sheltered inside. More than 100 cars were burnt or otherwise destroyed. Act with an iron fist. Smotrich and Ben Zion were not the only Israeli leaders, politicians, and commentators pouring fuel on the fire and seeking to legitimize the actions of the settlers. Areya Ehrlich, an editor at the ultra-Orthodox magazine Mishpacha, downplayed the riots by writing, "The thought now should not be of boys whose blood boiled after seeing the bodies of their two friends lying in their blood on the road." Whereas the Morrison Har-Melech from Jewish Power, the party of far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, that is part of the ruling coalition, called the riots the righteous cry of hundreds of Samaria residents who came out to protest and demand security. Similarly, another MP from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party sympathized with the settlers, urging the state to act with an iron fist. As videos of violent lawlessness spread on social media with Israeli forces seemingly unwilling to stop rioters, settlers were more than happy to share their plans. One settler filmed himself in Hawara as Palestinian houses burned in the background, predicting the coming end of the Israeli army and the transition to Jewish militias, going on to laud the very exciting revenge operation. Immune to the law. Yet the scenes also frightened many on the night, even drawing a comparison to Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, the direct pogrom against Jews carried out by the Nazi Party in Germany in 1938, from a seasoned commentator. The government needs to decide if it acts as a sovereign in the territories, if it is determined to impose law and order on Arabs and Jews alike, or if it serves as a fig leaf for the hilltop youth, wrote Nahum Barnea for the right-wing Israeli news outlet Ynet, referring to the radical settler group. Huwara's closed and burned. That's what I want to see. Only thus can we obtain deterrence. Zvika Fogel, Jewish Power politician. While Israeli settlers have regularly committed attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank, Sunday's attacks were almost unprecedented, warned Barnea. Rioting settlers feel immune to the law. Fear of the state does not apply to them, said Barnea. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir observed the rioters in Hawara and probably remember themselves. When they were their age, they behaved like them. While Hawara largely abandoned by its Palestinian residents, Israeli settlers rallied in the town, singing in unison under the protection of the army. Hawara is closed and burned. That's what I want to see. Only thus can we obtain deterrence, said Jewish Power politician Zvika Fogel, celebrating last night's riots. At least 62 Palestinians have been killed by Israelis this year, at a rate of more than one fatality per day. Meanwhile, 12 Israeli civilians and one police officer have been killed by Palestinians in the same period. This follows a steep increase in violence in 2022, when at least 167 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the highest death toll in these territories in a single year since the Second Intifada. Palestinians' attacks killed 30 Israelis last year. And here is a Palestinian child recounting settler pogrom. This is from mintpressnews.com. Mint Press News YouTube.
أول مرة وبكى بمواجهات فوق بين الشباب والمستوطنين وجيش الاحتلال، وإجوا شباب الحارة الفوق يجوا يدافعوا عنا، وطلع جميع المسيل هذا الإحجار على على الشباب فوق. طلعنا الصبح بس قلنا الله أكبر، هجموا علينا على الدار وبلشوا يكسروا وحركوا السيارة هناك لعند دار جارنا وولعوا دارهم. بعدين اجوا المستوطنين لهون وكان جيش الاحتلال بحمايتهم، واجوا لهون وكسروا الدور وحركوا السيارات برضو بحماية جيش الاحتلال. وجيش الاحتلال بكى يساعدهم ويفتح لهم البوابة. واجت الإطفاء وولعوا المصطبان. اجت الإطفاء رنوا على الإطفاء، اجت الإطفاء كسروها رموا عليهم احجار. احنا بنضلنا واقفين لحد الصمود، مستحيل نرحل من هان، بنضلنا واقفين لحد الصمود، نرحلش من هان الحوارة، لأنه هاي بلدي. يحمونا جميع اللي بيشوفنا هسه، يحمونا، بدنا حماية، لأنه جيش الاحتلال، لأنه كنا السلطة. هاي شايف بمركوا من هان بيرفعوا لنا أصبع، بمركوا مستوطنين، يعني بصيروا يتحركشوا.
Israeli Knesset members satisfied with Hawara burning down. This is Al Mayadeen. Israel media says Knesset members from Otzma Yehudit, Itamar Ben-Gvir's far-right party, admired how homes were burnt down in Hawara. Knesset members from the Otzma Yehudit party described Monday the violent attacks carried out by Israeli settlers in Hawara in the occupied West Bank, occupied Palestine, as legitimate. Israeli occupation police minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and far-right Israeli party Otzma Yehudit leader Itamar Ben-Gvir declined to comment on the attacks, Israeli media has said. Hawara is closed down and burnt down, and this is what I want to see, said Zvi Fogel, head of the National Security Committee in the Knesset. Only this way will we establish deterrence. Deterrence that's not existed since Operation Defensive Shield, the invasion of the West Bank in 2002, has been established, Fogel added, describing the damage done by the settlers in Hawara as good and saying that they deserved a lot of admiration. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society reported late Sunday that illegal Israeli settlers launched raids in Hawara, Nablus, violently assaulting Palestinians while the Israeli occupation forces were preventing ambulance crews from making it to the scene. The injuries were sustained as the Israeli occupation forces were providing protection for the illegal settlers, while the latter were vandalizing the property of Palestinians, including arson, as Israelis were setting fire to Palestinian cars and homes. Reportedly, as the Israeli occupation forces were preventing ambulance crews from accessing the scenes, the settlers were attacking the emergency vehicles. The settlers are setting fire to Palestinian properties in Hawara, so far burning down several homes and cars, on Al Mayadeen, an Al Mayadeen correspondent said. According to Palestinian sources, more than 150 Palestinians were injured in the attacks of the occupation forces and settlers, and 52 Palestinian homes and 130 Palestinian cars were burned. A civil defense vehicle was also destroyed. The Palestinian Ministry of Health announced the martyrdom of Sameh Hamdallah Akhtash, 37-year-old, who succumbed to severe wounds sustained by live bullets from the occupation forces and settlers' attack on the villages of Zatara near Nablus.
يقدر يجي ولع عند سيارتين باب الدار ولعت الدار اي حدا بيقدر يجي شباب اول بورين عند حواره.
Israel media reported early on Sunday that 2 settlers were killed with an M16 rifle in a shooting operation near the town of Hawara Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Israeli Channel 12 reported that the one behind the operation rammed the car of the 2 Israelis, then got out of his car, shot them and left the scene. After the operation, the leader of the Israeli opposition, Yair Lapid, described the situation as total chaos after Israeli occupation settlers aggressed the area and rampaged through properties of Palestinians, setting dozens of vehicles and houses ablaze, in addition to attacking the residents of the town. The government has lost control of Jewish terrorism, the cabinet, the Knesset, and the so-called settlers, Lapid said on his Twitter account. A few days before this operation, Inspector General of Police Kobi Shiftai said the Israeli occupation is witnessing a period of escalation, noting that there's a significant increase in the number of warnings. He added, "I've tried to refrain from giving interviews for the time being, but if there's anything preventing me from sleeping, it's the situation we're in." All right, watch this space, and remember that your engagement by way of a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Saudi Arabia to deposit $1 billion in Yemen's central bank. Riyadh, February 21st from Reuters. Saudi Arabia will make a $1 billion deposit in Yemen's Aden-based central bank on Tuesday, Saudi Arabia's state news agency SPA said, as the government there struggles with a weak currency and a high fuel and commodity prices. Riyadh leads a military coalition in Yemen that's been fighting the Iran-aligned Houthis since 2015, after the movement ousted the Saudi-backed government from the capital, Sana'a. The conflict has shifted to a no-war, no-peace stalemate, as the fighting has largely stopped, but both parties have failed to renew a UN-brokered truce that expired in October. It was not immediately clear whether the $1 billion was part of an existing $3 billion support package pledged last May by Saudi Arabia and the UAE for Yemen's economy. The internationally recognized government based in the south had seen its public finances worsen after the Houthi movement launched a series of attacks on terminals there that had hampered exports, a key revenue source. And from Barron's, UN raises $1.2 billion to help millions in war-torn Yemen. The UN raised around $1.2 billion on Monday to deliver aid this year to millions of people going hungry in war-ravaged Yemen, amid hopes that a fragile truce could foster a lasting peace. The figure was far short of the $4.3 billion sought from donors at a pledging conference in Geneva, but the UN hoped the figure could reach $2 billion by the end of the week. It was the seventh donor conference for Yemen in 7 years, but the UN hopes the next such gathering could focus on rebuilding the broken country rather than staving off hunger. We've had 31 pledges announced today, and these pledges come to just about $1.2 billion, UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths said in closing the conference. If we can make $2 billion by the weekend, that would be great. The UN says more than 21.7 million people, 2/3 of Yemen's population, need humanitarian assistance this year. It aims to reach the 17.3 million most vulnerable among them.
These are facts, they're numbers. You can quantify this.
Aaron Hutchinson, the Norwegian Refugee Council's Yemen chief, said the world had abandoned Yemen at this crucial crossroads by pledging only a quarter of the amount needed. This is woefully inadequate, gives a signal that some humans are less valuable than others, she said. Many countries demand an end to Houthi-imposed rules that force women, including female aid workers, to be accompanied by male guardians, hampering the delivery of aid. Totally out of context. Yemen's been racked by a devastating war since 2014, pitting Iran-backed Houthi rebels against the internationally recognized government supported by a Saudi-led military coalition. Since then, the war has caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, both directly and indirectly, and pushed the nation to the brink of famine. A truce that began on April 2nd last year expired on October 2nd, but many of its provisions have held. After years of death, displacement, destruction, starvation, and suffering, the truce delivered real dividends for people, UN Chief Antonio Guterres told the conference. We have a real opportunity this year to change Yemen's trajectory and move towards peace. Yemeni Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik Saeed added, ending the humanitarian crisis starts with ending the war. Last year, the UN raised more than $2.2 billion to enable aid agencies to reach nearly 11 million people across the country every month. The humanitarian organization CARE said the 2023 pledges meant aid agencies will be forced to reduce the number of people reached once again. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Yemen's economy and institutions had been pushed to the brink as Washington pledged $444 million. Despite the dire humanitarian conditions, there's a glimmer of hope as Yemen is experiencing the best opportunity for peace in years, he said in a statement. The parties now have the chance to end this war. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock told reporters in Geneva that the world keeps closing its eyes far too often on the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Yemen, as Berlin pledged 120 million euros. Griffiths hoped it would be the last such conference. The Yemeni crisis has gone on far too long, punishing millions of innocent people who didn't want it in the first place and deserve so much better, he said. Robert Mardini, head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, said each year that passed made post-conflict recovery tougher. Even if lasting settlements were found, humanitarian needs would remain high for years to come, he said. And from Al Jazeera, Saudi Arabia deposits $1 billion in Yemen's Aden-based central bank. Deposit comes as the Saudi bank administration struggles to handle weak currency and high fuel and commodity prices. Saudi Arabia signed an agreement to deposit $1 billion in Yemen's Aden-based central bank state-run SPA news agency has reported, a move aimed at boosting the war-torn country's economy. The announcement on Tuesday comes as the Saudi-backed administration struggles with a weak currency and high fuel and commodity prices after nearly 9 years of war. Riyadh intervened military in March 2015, months after the internationally recognized government was overthrown by Houthi rebels who controlled the capital, Sana'a, and large swaths of the country's north. It was not immediately clear whether the $1 billion was part of an existing $3 billion support package pledged last May by Saudi Arabia and the UAE for Yemen's economy. The internationally recognized government based in the south had seen its public finances worsen after Houthis launched a series of attacks on terminals there last year that hampered oil exports, a key revenue source. In November, the Arab Monetary Fund based in the UAE capital Abu Dhabi signed a $1 billion agreement to support Yemen's economic reform program. Last month, the Aden-based government raised the U.S. dollar exchange rate used to calculate customs duties on non-essential goods by 50%, amid dollar shortages, sending prices to all-time highs. On Tuesday, the rial was trading at $1,225 to the U.S. dollar on the black market, traders said. Yemen has two rival central banks. The government has resorted to money printing to finance the deficit, but in Houthi-held areas where new notes are banned, the rate's around 600 rials to the dollar. Yemen, the poorest country on the Arabian Peninsula, has been devastated since 2014 when the Houthi rebels linked to Iran removed the government of President Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi. Since then, the Houthis and a pro-government force supported by a Saudi-led military coalition have been engaged in fighting, killing tens of thousands of people and leaving 80% of the population reliant on aid with millions hungry. In April 2022, Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized Yemeni government based in Aden agreed to a 2-month United Nations-sponsored truce. The fighting has largely stopped, but both parties have failed to renew several other UN-broke truces that expired in October. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said in January that the progress was being made towards ending the war, but more work was needed, including transitioning to a permanent ceasefire. And from Reuters, Yemen's Hodeidah receives first ship carrying general cargo in years amid truce push. A container ship carrying general commercial goods docked at Yemen's main port of Hodeidah for the first time since at least 2016 on Saturday, as parties in Yemen's 8-year war are in talks to reinstate an expired UN-brokered truce deal. The conflict, which pits a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia against the Iran-aligned Houthi group, has divided Yemen and caused a humanitarian crisis that's left 80% of the 30 million population needing help. Goods arriving at Hodeidah have to be vetted by a UN body established to prevent armed shipments from entering Yemen. In the past 7 years, Djibouti-based UNVIM has given approval only to ships carrying specific goods like foodstuffs, fuel, and cooking oil. An official in the internationally recognized Yemeni government told Reuters granting access to commercial ships was a trust-building step aimed at supporting Saudi Houthi talks to reinstate the truce which expired in October. First cargo ship docks at Yemen's Houthi-controlled Hodeidah report. This is ArabNews.com. Al-Muqalla, a commercial ship carrying 724 containers of various items docked at Yemen's western port city of Hodeidah for the first time in 7 years, the Iran-backed Houthis who controlled the port said on Saturday. Abdul Wahab al-Dura, the Houthi Minister of Transportation, told reporters that container fuel and other commodity ships had been entering ports from Djibouti, where they examined under the UN Yemen verification and inspection mechanism. The docks at the ports of Hodeidah, Salif, and Ras Isa, are crowded with ships, and their ships are waiting to unload in the draft, al-Dura said, adding that further 18 ships are currently on the way. Houthi media released videos showing employees unloading the Ethiopian-flagged Shabelle cargo and container ship. The UNVIM stationed in Djibouti was created in 2016 at the request of the Yemeni government to check ships heading to Houthi-controlled ports to ensure they're not smuggling weapons to the Houthis. A Yemeni government official told Arab News on Sunday that the Arab coalition had given the go-ahead for the ships to head to Houthi-occupied ports in an effort to pressure the militia into renewing the UN-brokered ceasefire and to pave the way for a more durable peace agreement. Rashid al-Alimi, president of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council, said last week that Saudi officials informed the council of behind-the-scenes engagements and communications with the Houthis, and that their efforts were intended to achieve a breakthrough in getting the Houthis to sign an agreement with the Yemeni government to end the war. The arrival of the new ships at Houthi-controlled Hodeidah happened on the same day that the Yemeni government urged local merchants and international shipping companies to import goods through government-controlled ports, promising to provide them with reduced transportation costs and insurance and to protect them from Houthi threats. The Yemeni government on Saturday accused the Houthis of waging an economic war by instructing traders in regions under their control to import products through Hodeidah instead of government-controlled ports. Attempts by the Houthis to transform the peace process into an economic war aimed at aggravating the plight of the Yemeni people will fail, and the government will do all in its power to combat any lawful actions, the Yemeni cabinet said, according to the official news agency Saba. Meanwhile, on the ground, 9 Yemeni government soldiers and an unknown number of Houthis were killed in fighting in the Harab area of Marib's central province. An official told Arab News that the Houthis launched an attack on government troops on Baware mountain in Harab at midnight on Saturday, resulting in fierce fighting and a heavy exchange of fire that ended when the Houthis were forced to retreat after encountering stiff resistance and failing to seize control of the mountain. The Houthi attack on the strategic maintain range connecting Harab and Juba was repelled, the official who requested anonymity said. Hodeidah receives its first ship loaded with general cargo in many years amid a truce push. A container vessel loaded with general commercial items docked at the port of Hodeidah. This is the first time since 2016, and the docking happened on Saturday. This came through as parties in the 8-year war in Yemen are in discussions to reinstate an already expired truce deal that's in UN mediation. The conflict reportedly pits a military coalition spearheaded by Saudi Arabia against the Iran-aligned Houthi team, which has not only divided Yemen but also fueled a major humanitarian crisis, which eventually resulted in 80% of the total 30 million population seeking help. Goods reaching Hodeidah needed to be vetted by a UN establishment to prevent arms shipments from going to Yemen. For over 7 years now, UNVIM has been approving ships that carry only specific goods such as foodstuffs, cooking oil, and fuel. An official associated with the internationally recognized Yemeni government informed Reuters that permitting access to commercial vessels was one of the trust-building steps towards supporting Saudi Houthi discussions for reinstating the truce that expired in October 2022. Port officials said that the Shabelle, which per ship tracking data is an Ethiopian-flagged general cargo vessel, was given clearance by the UN Inspection Establishment, the Verification and Inspection Mechanism for Yemen, better known as UNVIM. The mechanism earlier only gave clearance for particular shipments. However, currently UNVIM is giving clearance for all sorts of shipments to the Hodeidah port, explained Abu Bakr Ben Ishaq, who heads Facilitated Red Sea Ports Corporation. Further, he added that the increased flow of goods within the West Port would lower transport costs, given most are entering via the south-based government-held Aden Port. Reuters reported that it saw 3 container vessels being docked on Saturday. The military alliance intervened in 2015 in Yemen after the Houthis had reportedly ousted the Saudi-enabled government from Sana'a. UNVIM began operations in 2016 around May. It was set up as the coalition was accusing the Houthis, de facto authorities based in northern Yemen, of smuggling Iran-based arms. The Houthis, as well as Tehran, deny such charges. Direct conversations between Saudi Arabia and the movement that's facilitated by Oman are parallel to UN-led efforts for restoring the truce. The war has killed thousands, destroyed the economy of Yemen, and left millions of people hungry. The Houthis have said they're fighting foreign aggression and corrupt system. Yemen threatens to punish shipping companies cooperating with Houthis. The Yemeni government threatened to revoke the licenses and block any shipping company cooperating with the Houthi militia. Ports of Aden Corporation. Let's be clear here. With all of this, all of these articles, they're coming from different perspectives as far as who the legitimate government is. The Houthi government is the legitimate government, as far as most people are concerned, and there are outside forces that are backing the former government, but as far as I know, the Houthi government is the legitimate government. Ports of Aden Corporation sent a letter to 2 shipping companies, warning against shipping towards Hodeidah port, stressing that the two companies' approval to divert their shipping routes to Hodeidah is a clear and explicit violation of the directives of the legitimate government. The letter warned it might cancel the permits granted to the companies, stopping their activities in their ports, noting that any navigational activity not approved by the legitimate government is a recognition of the coup militias. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik asserted the need to take all measures that preserve public funds and implement decisions regulating imports consistent with the government's obligations in combating money laundering and financing terrorism. Abdul Malik chaired the ministerial committee meeting in Aden to discuss economic developments and develop solutions to secure trade in land and seaports. According to the Saba news agency, the committee discussed the measures and decisions to facilitate imports. The committee also reviewed the plans and procedures to regulate trade movement, which could facilitate and ensure ease of arrival of goods and reduce the cost of transportation and insurance in the ports of the liberated areas. The committee stressed the need to take all procedures and measures to preserve public funds, implement government decisions regulating imports, and comply with the government's obligations in combating money laundering and terrorism financing. It emphasized taking the necessary steps to prevent transgressions or violations of local and international laws and mechanisms, including communicating with countries and export destinations. According to the Yemeni official media, ministers briefed the committee on implementing previous decisions and the required mechanisms and procedures. The Ministries of Transport and Trade denied any change in the ships' movement heading to Yemeni ports, including Hodeidah port under Houthi control. They confirmed the ongoing coordination with the UN and the coalition supporting legitimacy of imposing the mechanisms. Earlier, the Houthi militia claimed a change in the navigation movement heading to Hodeidah ports against the UN mechanism used to enter ships. The Transport Minister Abdul Salam Hamid confirmed that the shipments moving to the ports in liberated areas in Aden had stayed the same. Hamid assured major merchants, importers, and shipping companies that there were solutions to the difficulties facing trade activity and organizing transportation of the goods according to the regulatory frameworks. The governments, in full coordination with the UN and the coalition led by Saudi Arabia, asserted the minister, accusing the militias of spreading lies. He vowed that the government and its competent agencies would take all legal measures against commercial ships, cargo owners, and navigational agencies that violate the law and the mechanisms. And from TradeWindsNews.com, Yemen threatens ban on ship owners as cargo calls resume at Houthi port. Hodeidah has seen the first boxes in general cargo arrive since at least 2016. The Yemeni port of Hodeidah has received its first container in general cargo imports for at least 7 years, but the war-torn country's government had threatened a ban on companies sending ships to the terminal controlled by the Houthi rebel group. Reuters reported 3 container vessels docked at the port on Saturday after clearance was given by the United Nations. One of those was Ethiopian Shipping Lines 27,500 DWT 1,377 TEU multipurpose Shabelle, built 2006. AIS data shows the vessel was there for 3 days, leaving on Monday. The 9,000 DWT general cargo vessel, Asina, built 1995, of unknown ownership, is also shown at the port on Monday, as is the 6,500 GT Ro-Ro Iris of Sea, built 1993, open Seagate Management of Egypt. There are also bulkers and tankers in the terminal. Parties involved in Yemen's 8-year war are currently in talks to reinstate an expired UN brokered truce deal. The conflict pits a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia against the Iran-aligned Houthi group. Goods arriving at Hodeidah have to be vetted by the UN's verification and inspiration mechanism for Yemen, set up to prevent weapons entering the country. Only food and fuel shipments have previously been allowed into Hodeidah. The mechanism previously only provided clearance for specific shipments, but now UNVIM is granting clearances for all kinds of shipments to Hodeidah port. Mohammed Abu Bakr bin Ishaq, head of the Houthi-run Red Sea Ports Corps, told Reuters. He didn't say what cargo the Shebel was carrying, but the Yemeni government threatened to revoke licenses and block any shipping company cooperating with the Houthis. Ports of Aden Corps sent a letter to 2 shipping companies warning against moving goods to Hodeidah, the Asharq al-Awsat website reported. The letter said that imports were a clear and explicit violation of the directives of the legitimate government. It noted that any navigational activities not approved by the government is a recognition of the Houthi militia. And watch this space. Remember that your engagement through a like, a share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. And Brazil allows Iranian warships to dock in Rio despite U.S. pressure. 2 Iranian warships, this is from Iran International. This is a separatist Iranian paper, a paper that is not based in Iran. 2 Iranian warships docked in Rio de Janeiro on Sunday. The government granted permission despite pressure from the UN or from the United States to bar them. The Iris Makran and Iris Dina warships both arrived on Sunday morning, Rio's port authority said in a statement. Reuters earlier this month reported that Brazil had bowed to U.S. pressure and declined Iran's request for the vessels to dock in Rio in late January. In a gesture from Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva as he flew to Washington to meet U.S. President Joe Biden. However, with Lula's trip over, the ships have been allowed to dock. Vice Admiral Carlos Eduardo Horta Arens, the deputy chief of Brazil's naval staff, gave his approval for the ships to dock in Rio between February 26 and March 4th. The presence of the Iranian warships on Brazilian shores continues to irk the United States as it seeks to build closer ties with Lula's administration, which came into office on January 1st. In a February 15th press conference, U.S. Ambassador Elizabeth Bagley urged Brazil not to allow the ships to dock. In the past, the ships facilitated illegal trade and terrorist activities and have also been sanctioned by the United States. Brazil is a sovereign nation, but we firmly believe those ships should not dock anywhere, she said. Diplomacy with Iran was one of the highlights of Lula's attempts to bolster Brazil's international standing during his previous presidential terms. He traveled to Tehran to meet then-President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2010 as he sought to broker a nuclear deal. And from Memo, Brazil allows 2 Iranian warships to dock in Rio despite U.S. pressure. 2 Iranian warships docked in Rio de Janeiro on Sunday after Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's government granted permission despite pressure from the U.S. to bar them, Reuters reported. The Iris Makran and Iris Dina warships both arrived on Sunday morning, Rio's port authority said in a statement. Reuters earlier this month reported that Brazil had bowed to U.S. pressure and declined Iran's request for the vessels to dock in Rio in late January in a gesture from Lula as he flew to Washington to meet U.S. President Joe Biden. However, with Lula's trip over, the ships have been allowed to dock. Vice Admiral Carlos Eduardo Horta Arens, the deputy chief of Brazil's naval staff, gave his approval for the ships to dock in Rio between 26 February and 4 March, according to a 23 February notice in the official Gazette. The U.S. Embassy in Brasilia didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. The Brazilian Navy authorizes a foreign vessel to dock in Brazil, but only after authorization from the Foreign Ministry, which takes into account the requesting embassy's petition and logistics. The presence of the Iranian warships on Brazilian shores continues to irk the United States as it seeks to build closer ties with Lula's administration, which came into office on 1 January. In a 15 February press conference, U.S. Ambassador Elizabeth Bagley urged Brazil not to allow the ships to dock. In the past, those ships facilitated illegal trade and terrorist activities and have been sanctioned by the U.S. Brazil is a sovereign nation, but we firmly believe those ships should not dock anywhere, she said. Diplomacy with Iran was one of the highlights of Lula's attempt to bolster Brazil's international standing during his previous presidential terms. He traveled to Tehran to meet then-President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2010 as he sought to broker a nuclear deal between Iran and the United States. From Mehr News Agency, 2 Iranian warships dock in Brazil. The Iris Macron and Iris Dina warships both arrived on Sunday morning, Rio's port authority said in a statement according to Reuters. Reuters earlier this month reported that Brazil had bowed to U.S. pressure and declined Iran's request for the vessels to dock in Rio in late January, in a gesture from Lula as he flew to Washington to meet U.S. President Joe Biden. However, with Lula's trip over, the ships have been allowed to dock. Vice Admiral Carlos Eduardo Horta Arentz, the deputy chief of Brazil's naval staff, gave his approval for the ships to dock in Rio between February 26th and March 14th, according to a February 23 notice in the Official Gazette. And from Global Live Media, Brazil re-allowed 2 Iranian warships to dock in Rio de Janeiro. The Macron ship, during exercises in the Gulf of Oman, the Brazilian Navy authorized this Friday for 2 Iranian warships dock again on the Brazilian coast. The green light has been given for the ships Macron and Dina, and they'll arrive at the port of Rio de Janeiro between the 26th of February and March 4th, Saturday. It's the second grant of this type since in January the same ships were able to visit the city for 7 days. Both dispatches were signed by the deputy chief of the naval staff, Carlos Eduardo Horta Arentz, said the aforementioned outlet. The boats are part of the Iranian flotilla, and they're on the mission to go around the world. Macron's an oil tanker converted into a forward base for military helicopters, while the Dean is a frigate recently integrated into the French Navy. Last month, the event triggered alerts in the United States where the expedition was seen as a sign of defiance. We're aware of these claims by the Iranian Navy. We continue to monitor Iran's attempts to have a military presence in the Western Hemisphere, State Department spokesperson said Fox News in January. At the end of this month, the ships obtained authorization from the government of Lula da Silva, who during his inauguration met with an Iranian delegation led by the vice president of the country to dock at the port of Rio de Janeiro by an intermediary of the Brazilian Navy, according to a dispatch published on January 13th. This document indicated that the permit had been fixed for 2 vessels between 23 and 30 January. Iranian destroyer Dina Tehran Times. Iranian destroyer Dina Tehran Times. According to the reporter of Tehran Times, the plan was still to dock in Rio de Janeiro based on the statements of the Iranian Rear Admiral Hamza el-Kaviani and the Navy document. The High Command clarified that the Naval Fleet 86 includes the Dina and the Macron. The Dina's warship that's been part of the Iranian Navy since June 2021, equipped with anti-ship cruise missiles, torpedoes, naval guns. For its part, the Macron's an advanced-based ship that weighs 121,000 tons, with the capacity to carry 5 helicopters, and is used to provide logistical support to combat warships. In early January, the commander of the Islamic Republic Army said, "We've been present in all the strategic straits of the world, and not only in 2, and one of which will be present this year, and we plan to be present in the Panama Canal. The step's vital for the region since it connects about 6% of the world trade." Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, expressed concern over Iran's growing presence in the Western Hemisphere. Tehran's ability to expand its military presence in our hemisphere should be a wake-up call, especially since he intends to support left-wing Marxist regimes that will undermine peace and stability throughout the region. The Iranian regime has been ranked by successive administrations as the worst state sponsor of international terrorism in the world. That last part I completely disagree with. And so watch this space, and we'll be back with more news.
is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
The whole notion of logic.
I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here?
The whole notion of logic.
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them?
Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Netanyahu denies West Bank settlement freeze announced at Aqaba summit. While U.S. officials claimed the summit in Jordan was a positive step towards, or was a positive step for Israelis and Palestinians, Israelis' far-right officials made it clear that what happened in Jordan will stay in Jordan. Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu on 26 February denied that the government has any plans to halt the expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, contradicting a statement issued earlier in the day by the U.S. State Department at the conclusion of the Aqaba summit. Contrary to reports, construction and regulation in the West Bank will continue according to the original planning and construction schedule without any changes. There is and will not be any freeze, Netanyahu tweeted on Sunday. Israeli National Security Advisor Zachi Hanegbi echoed Netanyahu's words, saying in a statement, "In the coming months, Israel will authorize 9 outposts and will approve 9,500 new housing units in the West Bank. There is no settlement freeze or change in the status quo on Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there is no limitation on army activities." These announcements contradict the claims made in statements following the conclusion of the Aqaba summit in Jordan, which alleged an Israeli commitment to stop discussion of any new settlement units for 4 months and to stop authorization of any outposts for 6 months. The summit, hosted by Jordan kings Abdullah and Aqaba on the Red Sea coast, was attended by Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, Jordan, and the U.S. This gathering coincided with a new explosion of violence in the occupied West Bank. As the summit got underway, 2 Israeli settlers were shot and killed by a lone Palestinian gunman near Nablus. In response to this attack, dozens of Israeli settlers led a violent rampage on the village of Huwara on Sunday night, killing 1 Palestinian and injuring nearly 400, and burning dozens of homes and vehicles. According to the joint readout of the Aqaba summit, Israel and the PA agreed to de-escalate tensions and prevent further violence ahead of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Following the summit, Netanyahu's Jewish supremacist coalition allies rejected the agreements announced. What happened in Jordan, if it happened, will remain in Jordan, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said. I mean, to cast doubt that it happened is just nefarious. Yeah. And from breaking latest news, usually the translation of this site is a little bit inaccurate, so forgive me as I adjust on real time. Once again, Netanyahu tricks us on Jewish settlements. Mondoweiss. In Israel, Palestine, the U.S., Jordan, and Egypt just held a one-day summit in the Jordanian city of Aqaba yesterday intended to cool down the flames in Israel-Palestine. Its main aim was to build trust. The nation issued a joint communique at its end, which stated that that Israel was committed to stop discussing setting up new settlement units for 4 months and stop approving any new settlements for 6 months, and that the two sides, Israel and Palestine, would work closely together to prevent further violence in the name of advancing towards a just and lasting peace, as Reuters reported. But yesterday evening, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted that the whole part about the settlement freeze was fake news. In Hebrew, he wrote that the headlines were tweets just hearsay. In contradiction to the tweets, the building and the retroactive legalization of outposts in Judea and Samaria, this is Netanyahu's words, of course it's West Bank, will continue in accordance with the original timeline for planning and building with no changes. There is no freeze and will be no freeze. How could it be? Was Reuters lying? Did the U.S. just issue a lie without consulting Netanyahu? Haaretz Daily seeks to explain the discrepancy. In the joint announcement, there was no reference to freezing decisions that had already been made regarding construction in the settlements. Sources familiar with the talks told Haaretz that the thousands of housing units greenlit last week are all the construction plans that were ready for approval. So the massive wave of construction permits, over 7,000 permits, was passed a few days prior to the summit and will not be annulled by it. Likewise, the 9 settler outposts which were retroactively legalized would not be affected by the supposed freeze. It's a done deal. It's worth reflecting upon the magnitude of those 7,000 permits. Last year, Israel issued 4,427 permits for construction of Jewish settlements in 2021. 3,645 were approved. In other words, Israel's already processed a bulk of permits which far exceeds its tempo in the past years. In fact, almost doubles it. So it surely satiated its colonialist thirst for the coming 6 months of stoppage time. Haaretz pretty much confirms that understanding. There's not even a pause in pouring concrete. According to sources familiar with the talks, the commitment not to discuss new construction in the settlement for 4 months does not constitute a real concession on Israel's part. This is because the construction planning process requires a great deal of time and effort, so it would take several months regardless before the council could approve additional housing units. And these supposed concessions were being offered ahead of the summit. Fully a week ago, Haaretz reported that Israel has informed the U.S. that it will now build or improve new Jewish settlements in the West Bank beyond the 9 that are approved last week, a move which enraged Western leaders. Notice how the supposed liberal opposition Yair Lapid responded to that report of a concession a week ago. Opposition leader Yair Lapid said that he was surprised that the government agreed to the freeze. We never agreed to this despite repeated requests from the Americans. So Lapid, the good guy as far as liberal Zionists are concerned, was basically boasting at his party meeting that he was a tougher against the Americans and that he was a tougher settler than the Netanyahu. So much for opposition. Michael Link, former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Occupied Palestine territory, observed these political dynamics ahead of the summit when he wrote, "On the other hand, Netanyahu's far-right allies in the new government, particularly Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, were relatively quiet about the pause, indicating that they understand the prevailing American-Israeli quid pro quo on the settlements. That reference to quid pro quo means a deal that the United States cut with other countries at the UN Security Council to water down a resolution proposed by the UAE, calling all the settlements what they are, flagrant violations of international law. The resolution morphed into a non-binding Security Council statement that avoids mentioning their illegality, but that silence on the part of Netanyahu's partners in war crimes was temporary. Smotrich, who's now in multiple ministerial positions and poised to realize his full apartheid plan, tweeted yesterday, "I have no idea what they talked about or didn't talk about in Jordan. I heard about this useless conference from the media just like you, but the one thing I do know, there will be no freeze of the building and development in the settlements, not even for 1 day. It's under my authority." Smotrich's tweet was published exactly 2 hours before Netanyahu tweeted that there will be no freeze. Following Smotrich's tweet, his alter ego and fellow Minister of National Security Ben-Gvir tweeted his own mockery of the summit. What happened in Jordan, if it happened in Jordan, stays in Jordan. Ben-Gvir in the legal Jewish outpost settlement of Evyatar calling for its legalization February 27, 2023 from his Twitter feed. So there you have it. The freeze was a trick. It wasn't a real concession. It just sounded good. It gave Netanyahu the opportunity to have his cake and eat it. He's now supposedly compromising, but the concessions were already made. When the noises came from the further right, and he's the most left member of his coalition, about him being soft, he can assure them that he wasn't. This is very much like the now famous secret video from 2001, which surfaced a decade later, in which Netanyahu explained to a settler family how he manipulated the Oslo agreements to avoid a racing to the 1967 lines. How do we do it? Defend military zones, I said, are security zones. From my point of view, the Jordan Valley is defined as a military zone, right? That video is where Netanyahu also boasted, I know what America is. America is a thing you can move very easily. Move it in the right direction, they won't get in the way. Recall that Biden was in the Obama administration in 2016 when it abstained on a UN Security Council resolution that described the settlements as flagrant violation of international law, but Obama was a lame duck and Biden is running for election. That's enraging, but it should be equally shocking that Yair Lapid made a statement that echoes Netanyahu and Smotrich. And so it continues. The Israeli settlement enterprise is a national value, and its quasi-constitutional nation-state law of 2018 states, and it specifies exclusively Jewish settlement. It's not going away. It's not going away. It's not even freezing, not even temporarily. The minister, now singularly in charge of it, Smotrich, says it won't even freeze for a day, and these settlements sit at the very core of the whole matter, as Link writes. The settlements are the engine of the Israeli occupation, the facts on the ground for Israel's looming quest to annex the West Bank, and the source of many of the human rights violations against the Palestinians living in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. It's not complicated at all. In fact, Link notes, the illegality of the Israeli settlements is also one of the most settled issues in modern international law. And here we are discussing whether it's a freeze or no freeze, while Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Giver chuckle amongst themselves. They've tricked us again. We really are easy to move. They should speak for themselves because they've tricked them again, and they really are easy to move in my estimation. And from Al Jazeera, Netanyahu says no freeze in settlement construction in West Bank. Barely hours after Jordan hosted a meeting between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the Red Sea city of Aqaba, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the building of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank will continue to go ahead. Sunday's meeting, which was also attended by Egypt and the United States, was called in order to discuss steps to de-escalate tensions amid surging violence in the occupied Palestinian territories. And from EnglishAlMayadeen.net, Israel contradicts Aqaba summit report, settlement process continues. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed Sunday evening in a response to a Jordanian statement regarding the results of the Aqaba summit that the construction of settlement outposts in the West Bank will continue without any charge. Netanyahu said on Twitter that contrary to what was published, construction and legislation in the West Bank settlements will continue according to the basic plans and times, and there's no freeze and there will not be a settlement freeze. In turn, the head of the Israeli National Security Council, Zachi Hanegbi, also confirmed that contrary to reports about the Aqaba summit, which was held in Jordan with the participation of delegations from Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and the U.S., there's no change in Israeli policy during the coming months. Hanegbi added 9 settlement outputs will be legalized and 9,500 new units will be built in the West Bank, and as reported by Israeli media, Hanegbi also stated, in accordance with Netanyahu, that there will be no construction freeze or change in the status quo in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there are no restrictions on the occupation's army activities in the West Bank, contradicting the Jordanian statement. The words of the senior security officials of the Israeli occupation contradict what the Jordanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement following the summit earlier today. According to the announcement of the Jordanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the occupation government and the Palestinian Authority confirmed their joint readiness and their commitment to immediate action to stop unilateral measures for 3 to 6 months. The Jordanian Foreign Ministry said the meeting included an Israeli commitment to stop discussing the establishment of any new settlement units for 4 months and to stop approving any new settlement outputs for a period of 6 months. Moreover, the statement added that the occupation government and the Palestinian Authority affirmed reducing escalation and preventing further violence in addition to agreeing to meet again in this format in Sharm el-Sheikh in the Arab Republic of Egypt next March. The Jordanian statement concluded that the Palestinian and the Israeli sides affirmed their commitment to all previous agreements between them and worked to achieve a just and lasting peace and reaffirmed the need to commit to reducing escalation on the ground and preventing further violence. Again, that's from Al-Mayadeen. And from AA.com, This is Israeli premier says it will not freeze building settlements in the West Bank. Netanyahu denies media reports on halting settlement constructions for 4 months following a Kaaba meeting. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said there will be no change in the plan to build illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Netanyahu's remarks came following a meeting held in Aqaba, Jordan on Sunday, with the participation of Palestine, Israel, Jordan, the U.S., and Egypt. The Israel premier denied reports by the Israel media that Israel, following the meeting, decided to freeze the construction of new settlements in the West Bank for 4 months. Construction and arrangement in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, will continue according to the original planning and schedule without any changes. There's not and will not be any freezing, Netanyahu said. Security meeting in Aqaba. The Jordan Foreign Ministry published the closing statement of the security meeting in Aqaba, saying the government of Israel and the Palestinian National Authority confirmed their joint readiness and commitment to immediately work to end unilateral measures for a period of 3 to 6 months. This includes an Israeli commitment to stop discussion of any new settlement units for 4 months and to stop authorization of any outposts for 6 months, it added. The meeting of the city of Aqaba was called by the U.S., Egypt, and Jordan to discuss de-escalating tensions between the Palestinian and Israeli delegates. The Aqaba meeting was the first of its kind since the U.S.-sponsored peace talks between the delegates collapsed in 2014 over Israel's refusal to halt the settlement constructions and release Palestinians in prison before 1993. The meeting came amid tensions across the occupied territories following Israeli military raids into Palestinian towns. At least 62 Palestinians were killed by Israeli army fire in the West Bank since the start of the year, according to Palestinian figures. And from Wali News, there's an OIC meeting. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has convened its extraordinary meeting in the context of Israel's increasing aggression in Palestine. According to the Saudi press agency, an extraordinary meeting of the Executive Committee of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation will be held tomorrow, February 28th, Tuesday. This meeting is being convened in the context of the recent open aggression by Zionist forces in the city of Nablus on the West Bank, killing 11 Palestinians and injuring 100 others. The meeting was called to emphasize the need to fulfill its obligation to end these ongoing crimes of Israel and to provide the necessary international protection to the Palestinian people. The meeting comes under the framework of coordinated efforts with the international community to protect the Palestinians. And I'm going to open a channel here. And remember, your engagement through a like, share, and or subscribe will catapult us, propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.